we don't write the contracts from scratch. We already have them prepared. We just need to know what to fill out. Before we get into filling out a contract, we're going to go over a lot of the anatomy of a contract. We're going to go over documents that are given before and the steps that we do before we ever get to a contract, meaning getting everything up to getting a listing, to getting a buyer, and the disclosures that we give and all that good stuff. So when it comes to using the contracts, it's just don't leave any blank lines and fill them out. All right, so we have buyer brokerage agreements. Remember that. So go down on page 173 where it says buyer brokerage agreements. And I'll just give you that cross reference on page 40 that you just write next to the title there. We already went over these. There's no need to go over them again, right?
I'm sorry, you said right, what next to the title right there?
Page 40, just a cross reference. That was that exclusive buyer agency agreement. We went over it like 2-3 times already, so.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
And then we also have the dual agency agreements where it says transaction broker and dual agency agreements. Well, transaction and broker agreements, they're written custom. There is no sample here. So just next to dual agency agreements, right, page 47, 4 types. Because there's one for buyer, seller, tenant, landlord. And there's one, I think, for the seller that's on page 47. And then we're going to temporarily skip over the actual sales contract here, which is the next bunch of pages. And then we'll go back. We'll actually fill it in. Go to page 187. Now, when it comes to the sales contract itself, there's no official name to it. Some people call it a purchase contract. Some people call it a sales contract. They got several other names for it here: offer to purchase, contract of purchase and sale, earnest money agreement, binder and deposit receipt, and there's a lot of other variations to it too. There's no official name is the point. All right, offer and acceptance. How does that work? Offer and acceptance, that's where somebody makes an offer and someone needs to accept it. And that's the stage where we come to a meeting of the minds, where we have to be aware of all the terms of the contract, and then the parties agree to them. And when they come to agreements and they stop going back and forth with their negotiations and wordings and such, it's said that we've come to a meeting of the minds. And even when we negotiate and we make an offer that's accepted and it's signed, technically, I mean, they say that we've come to a meeting of the minds, but still, that meeting of the minds still goes on through the attorney review period. Because when we send it over to the attorneys are still making changes to the wording, right? So I guess technically you could say that they're still going on even after that meeting of the minds, right? Oh, it's horrible. No coffee today. All I could drink is water. I got that doctor's appointment later.
Oh, so you didn't have your coffee, huh?
Oh my God.
No,
No morning coffee.
Something is different this morning.
Well, I was also frustrated with the computer. You know, it takes forever to boot up. I usually just put it in sleep mode, but I shut it down last night. It takes forever to start. Okay, so earnest money deposits. Earnest money deposits, or good faith deposit, we call it. It's when somebody makes an offer. It's customary to make $1,000 good faith deposit along with that offer. But even if no good faith deposit is offered, the offer is still valid. The contract is still valid. However, just be aware of this, that, you know, if you got clients that are making offers and they're not putting any money as a good faith, showing that they're working in good faith, the other agent's probably not going to advise their client not to accept it. So it is kind of standard. It's customary, I should say. There's no standard. It's customary to put down at least $1,000 good faith deposit when making an offer. It shows that you're operating in good faith, or as much of a deposit as you possibly could. The larger that deposit, the more serious your offer seems. All right. So, but the contract's still valid, even if it's made without one. Just, you know, keep in mind, the other side's gonna be like, raises an eyebrow. You know, you're not even putting any money down with the offer. Mm, that's kind of sketchy.
Mhm.
You're gonna need a lot more than $1,000 to purchase this property. You don't got $1,000 put down, show you're operating in good faith. Meaning you're not putting an offer on 20 different properties and seeing which one sticks, you know?
Mhm.
So if the offer is rejected, that earnest money is deposit is returned immediately to the would-be buyer. Now, if the offer is accepted, but the transaction falls apart, the seller has to agree to release those funds back to the buyer, or they have to make a claim against them. Okay, they can't just sit there in limbo. They gotta either say, okay, the offer is dead, you can release those funds back to the buyer, or they got to make a claim against them. And then when it makes a claim, the buyer can object to it. And if that's the case, the broker cannot release those funds to anybody unless both parties agree to where they are going. All right, even though it's the buyer's money, the seller can make a claim against it. For instance, saying that they weren't operating in good faith or they breached the contract in some way, and they're wanting to keep that good faith deposit. But the buyer doesn't have to agree to it. And if that's the case, then the only way that the broker can release those funds to anybody is if a judge orders it.
Mm.
They don't, if both sides don't agree to it.
That claim, is that that special
It's just a claim. The broker, the seller says, you know what, we don't authorize the release of the funds back to the buyer because whatever their reason is.
but when you breach the contract, there's a
No, this is not liquidated damages. If that's
no, not liquidated damage.
liquidated damages is an agreement of how much money is going to serve as compensation if somebody breaches a contract. And not
No,
all
no.
contracts have that in it. You would have to specifically put a liquidated damage agreement into a contract.
No. Mm.
Okay.
No, when you do a claim against someone, no, it's I'll find the word. When you're taking them to court, it's called special something when they breach a contract.
No. When you're forcing somebody to carry out the terms of the contract as they agreed, that's specific performance. Is that what you're thinking of?
Maybe. Oh, well, go ahead. I'll think about
Well, that still doesn't have anything to do with this. This is just the seller making a claim that they want to keep the buyer's money because
what is
they weren't
specific-
operating in good faith.
Then what is specific performance then?
It's a lawsuit forcing one party to carry out the terms of the contract as they agreed to in the contract.
Right. So that is considered a breach then, right?
Well, no, this is just at the stage of making the offer.
That's
You make an
right.
offer and then it goes to contract, okay? If they don't accept the offer, the money's immediately returned to the buyer.
Yeah, I understand this, but I heard you had mentioned breach of contract. That's why that word came.
Yes, because if they accept the offer and then it goes to the, if they accept the offer and then it goes to attorney review, if the buyer does breach the offer, the seller could say, I want to keep the deposit money. Now, there was no pre-written agreement in place. I'm talking about when there is no liquidated damage agreement. There's no
Okay.
agreement about keeping any money or getting any money award. The seller can just be like, well, I want to keep that money. I'm going to make a claim against it because I don't think that they were operating in good faith. And they took they had me take my property off the market. It could have costed me money or whatever. So I want to make a claim against their money. Okay, that's all that it's saying. There's no fancy word for it or no.
So this is a
term.
claim just against the earnest money.
That's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, a meeting of the minds is when all the parties are in agreement on the details of the contract. But the school exam would focus more on the aspects of the finances. When the parties are in agreement on price, down payment, and financing method. So how are you coming up with the rest of the cash? So under offer and acceptance here, let's see how this works. They just tell you a little story here about how offer and acceptance works. It says, one of the essential elements of the valid contract is a meeting of the minds whereby one party, whereby the buyer and the seller agree on the terms of the sale. This usually is accomplished through the process of offer and acceptance. So a broker will list the owner's real estate for sale at an agreed upon price. And then a buyer steps in and either makes an offer at that asking price or some other price. So a purchase offer is drawn up, signed by the prospective buyer. Their broker presents it to the seller, and this is known as an offer. If the seller agrees to the offer exactly as it was made and signs the contract, then the contract has been accepted pending attorney review. The broker then must advise the buyer and the seller of the buyer of the seller's acceptance, and then they send it off to the attorneys and they start that attorney review if they wish. Any attempt by the seller to change the terms proposed by the buyer is called a counteroffer. And a counteroffer is, in essence, a rejection of the offer that the buyer had made. So now, if the buyer's offer is rejected, the buyer can just walk away. They don't need to do anything else. So if a seller makes a counteroffer, the buyer doesn't even need to acknowledge it. They could just walk away because they essentially rejected the offer that had been made. Or they could accept the offer, or they can make another counteroffer. Okay, so that's what a counteroffer is. It's essentially a rejection of your offer, and I'm going to make another offer back to you. So these are your options. All right, so an offer is not considered accepted on the next page, 188. We're going to highlight an offer is not considered accepted until one of the parties making the offer has been notified of the other party's acceptance. So in contract negotiations, when is an offer considered accepted?
Until the person making the offer has been notified.
That's it.
And what, how many days is that?
How many days is what?
For once the offer is accepted.
Well,
So-
anytime your agent is notified about anything, it's as if you've been notified, because they're obligated to immediately report back to their client. So because the law requires us to report back to our client any information, that's our fiduciary duty, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Disclosure.
Mhm.
So if somebody tells us something, it's as if our client's already been notified.
Immediately.
All right, so I gotta get forward a couple of slides. So let me get caught up with the content here. We got the a kickback is anything of value given to anybody without a license, right? And closing gifts should be kept to minimum under $35, I would say, because you don't want anything being construed as a kickback. And closing gifts you would only give to a buyer, not to a seller, by the way. Parts of the sales contract. This stuff is a little bit out of order here, though. Offer and acceptance should be here. And earnest money deposit, we already went over. All right. Yeah, there's a couple slides here out of order. Let me reorder them. This is slide number 33. Parts of sales contract. Kickback 29. There we go. I think I got it in the right order now. Yeah, that order was a little bit off for some reason. All right, so yes. So offer and acceptance. Okay, so first the seller lists their property for sale at a certain price. Then the buyer makes the offer at the full listing price or another amount. And then they present that offer. The seller then accepts the offer, rejects it, or makes a counter offer, which is basically a rejection of the buyer's initial offer. So at this point, the buyer's free to walk away if that happens. If the seller makes a counter offer, the buyer can then accept it, reject it, or make another counter offer of their own. They can go back and forth like this until one of the parties agrees to the last party's offer. When they do, this is called a meeting of the minds. They've come to agreement on all the terms. And the offer is accepted pending attorney review. It is still not a legally binding contract, though, until it's out of attorney review. A contract can be canceled anytime during during the attorney review period. They don't even need a reason to. Okay. So if the seller already accepted your offer and it went to attorney review, and while it's in attorney review, another offer comes in that the seller likes more, they don't even need to give you a reason. It'd be courteous of them to tell you we got another offer and to make another that's higher, and for you to have the opportunity to come up with your offer, but they don't have to. They could just kill the deal and accept the other one if they wanted to.
Mm.
Okay. So when is offers considered accepted in contract negotiations? When the last person who made the offer has simply been notified that their offer has been accepted. And this can be done verbally. However, it's suggested to always follow up with getting it in writing. And it's a good practice to always follow up getting it in writing. So it's suggested and a good practice, but not required. Okay, so I'm going to throw that in there too. It's suggested and a good practice. Always follow up and get it in writing, but not required. There you go. Good enough. Just enough characters. All right. So let's see. So what does that mean? When somebody makes an offer in contract negotiations, when is your offer considered accepted? Simply when your agent tells you, hey, your offer's been accepted. Now, it's always a good practice to get those final terms in writing and signed off on, so that then you could send it off to the attorney review and you got proof of it and all that, right? But technically speaking, for exam purposes, when is an offer considered accepted in contract negotiations?
Meeting of the minds, isn't it?
When the parties have been notified.
When the parties have been notified of the acceptance.
Yes. Now there's an answer
Yeah,
option
yeah.
to get in an exam when the parties have been notified and they signed the contract, or when the party's been notified and they get it in writing. No, that's suggested, and that's what you should do. That's the good practice of doing that. However, simply when the person calls you on the phone and says, hey, your offer has been accepted, guess what? It's been accepted.
So not just notified, but accepted, right?
When you've been notified, it's been accepted. They call you on the phone, they tell you, hey, your offer's been accepted. You've been notified.
Okay.
The offer is accepted when you're notified.
That's it. And that could be verbal. Doesn't require it to be in writing.
Mm.
I just stressed that for a couple seconds because I know it's an exam question.
Yeah,
All right.
verbally.
Offer is accepted when the person is notified.
That's it. All right, moving on. So, and we highlighted that too at the top of page 188, first sentence.
Oh, yeah.
And even that paragraph, if you go on to read it, it goes on to say, it's always a good practice to follow up and getting it in writing, but it's not required though. It's good practice. Okay.
Of the other party's acceptance.
Now, earnest money deposit, also called the good faith deposit. So sometimes referred to as a good faith deposit. It's the money the buyer puts down when they're making an offer, and it's customary to put down at least $1,000 good faith offer, right? With the offer when they're making it. Now, by making $1,000 good faith deposit, the buyer's asking the seller to take their property off the market. And so they want to make a deposit large enough to show they're serious with their intentions to follow through with the transaction. If the seller rejects the offer, that money's immediately returned to the would-be buyer. If this offer is accepted, the money will be credited towards the buyer's purchase. But it gets deposited, either way, it gets deposited right away into the broker's escrow account. We have to give it to the broker immediately, and then the broker has how long to put it in the escrow account?
5 days.
5 days.
So if the buyer breaches the contract, the seller could make claims to keep it, which is what I was talking about a little while ago. But both parties would have to agree to that. If they don't, only a judge could decide who gets that money, right? If both parties don't agree to where that money's going, only a judge can make that decision. Here, let me clear that up a little bit. So if the buyer breaches the contract, oh, money, I got it here too. So if the offer is accepted, the money will be credited towards the buyer's purchase price. If the buyer breaches the contract, the seller could make a claim to keep it, but both parties would have to agree to that. If they don't, only a judge could decide who gets that money unless both parties agree on who it goes to, agree about who gets it. So the brokers keep the deposit money given to our clients into that escrow account that's used only for keeping clients' money in for short periods of time. And those are going to be non-interest bearing escrow accounts if we're keeping it for short periods of time. So it must be deposited within 5 business days, the time that the client gave us the money, not the time that the offer is accepted or not. So we don't hold on to we don't take post-dated checks. We don't hold on to the money. We don't hold on to the checks and not deposit them until we find out if the offer is accepted either. Because when we're making that offer, we're telling the seller that we already have that money in the escrow account. And that would be lying. So we can't do that. We got to deposit that money right away. So let's do some highlighting. Under earnest money deposit, second line, end of the line, it says it in bold. We're going to highlight the earnest money or good faith deposit gives evidence of the buyer's intention to carry out the terms of the contract. And then the next paragraph, in the last sentence of the next paragraph, we're going to highlight contracts provide that the deposit becomes the seller's property if the buyer defaults as liquidated damages. Now, I want you to write in the margin a little note to that. Only if wording was added to the contract. Only if this wording was added to the contract. They don't automatically keep that money. Only if the wording was added to the contract. Okay.
Yes.
Then the next paragraph, we're going to highlight the first 3 lines. Wait, is it the first 3 lines? That the earnest money deposit has to be put into the escrow account within 5 days, and the money can't be commingled. And when the broker does, if the broker uses their client's money in the escrow account, it's an illegal act called conversion, because they're converting their money into their own. All right. And then the very last line in the next paragraph, there was only one line that says, any cash deposit of $10,000 or more must be reported to the IRS. I know we highlighted this stuff before, but little repetition on this stuff that's going to be on exam anyway doesn't hurt, right?
Not at all.
There we go. So here's some of the parts of the sales contract. Contract has to be in writing, has to have competent parties, just like any contract would, right? There has to be agreement to buy and sell or lease, you know. Adequate description of the property has to be included. What exactly is being sold? Consideration, the full price. That's a legal tender, exchange of value, or love and affection if it's a gift, right? You have to have the grantor's agreement to convey. Who's the grantor?
The grantor. Oh,
The owner, right?
Yeah. When the owner sells their property, they're granting their property to ownership to
To the
someone.
grantee.
So the grantor is the one that gives the ownership. Yep. And the grantee is the one that receives it. Correct. And they place, we got to stipulate the place and time of closing. Where's the closing going to take place in the contract? But that often can be modified later. That doesn't matter. As well as the, well, place and time, the dates. We put the dates down. We don't put down the exact time. That gets hashed out by the attorneys. Signatures of the parties with the initials on every page, on the bottom of every single page of the sales contract. You're going to have the initials for both parties on that contract. I'll show you. Gotta open up that sales contract again. I'm going over it anyway. All right, here's some of the non-essential elements of a valid contract while that contract opens up. Hope it's opening up. Oh, there you go. So here's the sales contract. You see on the bottom of every page, there's a place here for the buyer's initials, the seller's initials on the bottom of every page. You see that? Don't leave these blank. You leave them blank, somebody can swap out one of the pages on the contract with different terms put in. Okay. Make sure the bottom of every page is signed. We don't just go to the last page of the contract and sign it, because then people can change the content in between, right? So here's some of the non-essential parts of a valid contract. Any encumbrances to which a deed is going to be made subject to. Earnest money deposits, even though we put that right on the first page. Right on the first page of the sales contract is where we write the earnest money deposit amount. Here, let me show you. First page of the contract, after you put all the buyer, seller's information, the property in question that's being purchased. You see initial deposit here on this line. Can you guys see this? Yes, you can. The initial deposit. Okay. So we got a place for initial deposit, additional deposits. Okay. So these are all earnest money deposits. Okay.
Okay.
And once again, these are non-essential because you don't, an offer without the deposit is still good, right? Without a good faith
Yeah.
deposit.
Yeah.
All right. Mortgage financing the buyer plans to obtain and other contingencies. I'll show you, instead of swapping back and forth, I'll show you where it is when we go over the contract. The date that the possession is to be taken by the buyer. What type of title evidence? We have a little write-up about that, but it's not required to put in there which one. Prorations and adjustments. Okay, well, that doesn't get put into the contract. That gets done by the attorneys or the closing agents if there's someone else, if it's a title company doing it. That's for like the final adjustments on utility bills and tax bills and stuff like that. Destruction of the premises. We have a clause in there that deals with the destruction of the premises, but that's not an essential valid part of the contract to make it valid, but we got it in there anyway. What happens if either party defaults? That's not required to put in a contract, but you could add a liquidated damage agreement or some other kind of agreement. I think there's something usually in there that says what happens if one of the parties defaults, but not necessarily about awards. When do we do the final walkthrough? Well, it's not essential for a valid contract to write that into the contract, and often it's not written in the contract. We just do it. But it's the day of closing, on your way to closing, right?
Mhm.
And contingencies. By the way, with final walkthroughs, you want to do that on the day of closing. However, remember, after you do a home inspection, you want to make sure that you get back in there. You don't wait till the final walkthrough to make sure that the seller did any work that they had to do on the day of closing. You're going to do that as soon as they get the work done. So if you're the buyer's agent, you should be following up with the seller's agent as to did they do the work yet, so that we can get the inspector back in there to make sure they did it right, that they did it and they did it right. Otherwise, you guys are going to find that you're going to be going to the final walkthrough and you're going to see they didn't do any of the work, or they did a half-assed job, or they, so you want to make sure that work, any work that was supposed to have been done was done.
So
Right.
with that final walkthrough, whatever, let's just say mold, I don't know, something was in there that I didn't want in there. And on our final walkthrough, we see it.
Well, mold is not something that's going to turn up like that overnight, though. You would have had that inspection done already and then addressed the inspection issues. That's an inspection issue. You're
Okay,
not
so
looking for stuff like that on the final walkthrough. On the
Okay.
final walkthrough, you're looking for you're just making sure that the seller removed all their junk. They didn't leave any garbage behind, and they didn't strip out the cabinets or put holes in the walls. And they basically left the property in the same condition that it was in. If there's mold there, that mold was there when you did that inspection. I doubt that much time passed by for mold to grow.
all right, so okay, so forget not the mold, but whatever. He took the cabinets or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
So
Okay.
now I'm deciding, like, I feel like you kind of broke the contract. Kind of
Well, they
like,
did. They're
yeah,
not
so-
allowed to. Those are fixtures. Cabinets are part of the real estate. You cannot physically modify the real estate. That's the whole purpose of doing that walkthrough.
Right. So now I say, well, you know what? Listen, you're not, I don't even want to deal with you no more. I don't even want the house, because can I just do it? Can I do that?
Well, that's the purpose of the walkthrough, to make sure that they did not modify the property or damage it in any way. And if they did, they're in breach of contract. They would have to do any repairs or put anything back, or you could back out of the contract and sue them.
Yeah, okay.
That's why we do the final walkthrough. We're looking for things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If the chandelier is gone, but they never said they were taking the chandelier, you can't take the chandelier. It's a part of the real estate. See, this is one that could be an argument now where people start suing each other in court. Well, technically, is the chandelier part of the real estate, or is it chattel? Well, that now needs to be argued in court.
Mm-hmm.
And because not all judges rule uniformly. You could get one judge that says, oh no, that's personal property. And it's like, wait a minute, that's bolted and chained to the ceiling. It's hardwired to the electrical. How are you going to say that's personal property?
Right.
You know? So that would need to be argued out. And then lastly, signatures of witnesses are not an essential required part of the contract. If we go back one page here on page 186, this is the final page of the sales contract. Or here, I'll put it up on screen too. I'll scroll down to the end of the sales contract here. And you can see to the left of the buyer and seller's signature is the witness's signature. This is probably where you as the real estate agent would sign it after you saw the buyer or seller sign it. But if you did not sign here, right? Is the contract still valid? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Your signature, the witness's signature is not required. But, you know, you're going to want to make it legit anyway. You're going to be like, yeah, let me see that. Let me make sure you signed every place you did. You did. Everything's good. All right, now let me make it legit. Let me sign and witness, even though it's not required. It's just little theatrics, you know? All right. Now, the sales contract, we already said that there's no official name to it. That's on page 187 here. It goes by many different names. Call it whatever you want. There's no official name. Contingencies. Okay, that's on page 189. The contingencies.
189.
Contracts. Yes, okay. Contingencies. Okay, so well, before we get into contingencies, I want you guys on page 189 to highlight under the bullet point list there, the signature of a witness is not essential for a valid contract. The signature of a witness is not required part of a sales contract.
Signature for a witness is not essential.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then where it says contingencies, we're going to highlight the very first sentence. When the purchaser intends to secure an FHA or VA loan, a special contingency clause must be included in the sales contract that provides that the contract may be voided if the property appraises below the purchase price. Well, I should make that the first one in this list here. So under the contract contingencies, minimize that. Yeah. So contract contingencies, I'm going to put this as the first one here. So what is a contingency? Let's start off with that before we start getting into contingencies. It's a happening. A contingency is a happening in which a contract is dependent on. It's subject to. And that's a powerful phrase, subject to, that could be used and added into contracts. This purchase is subject to the house appraising for the purchase price. What does that mean? That means that if it doesn't appraise for the purchase price, the buyer can get out of the contract without penalty. Or they could ask the seller to lower the price, or they could knowingly reach in their pocket and pull out more money, right? But when you put that as subject to in the contract, that's your way out. Let's see, what's the other things they give? They have all kinds of other home inspection contingency clauses, right? So here, the home inspection contingency clause is right after that. It's subject to a home inspection. If the house doesn't meet certain requirements or repairs need to be made, if the seller's not willing to do the repairs, then the buyer, or dangerous conditions are present, the buyer can get out of the contract, right? It's subject to that home inspection. It's also subject to the buyer being able to obtain a mortgage to finance the purchase of the real estate, right? It's subject to an approval. Here's an example, an approval from a family member that may be helping out with the financing or down payment. Okay. Look, This is a common one. You guys need to ask this question when buyers are filling out the contract. Ask them, or even before that, ask them when you're showing houses. Is there anybody else's approval we need to get? Is there any family members helping you out with down payment or anything that you're not going to be able to go through this purchase unless you get their approval first? That's an important question to ask. Because if the family members don't approve of it and they can't go through with it, if you did not write that in the contract when making the offer, you can't use that as a way to get out of the contract. The buyer will be technically in breach of contract and the seller can sue them. Right? So it's important to get that that information out there. Plus, what I want to do is I don't want to have to add it to the contract. If I'm aware of this, you want to submit contracts that are as contingency free as possible. That makes them better offers because they don't have these contingencies, these ways out, right? A seller sees that if you got this laundry list of these are ways for me to get out of the contract, that's not looked down as a good contract. So if you got a multiple offer situation, which offer is better? The one with all the contingencies or the one with few? Few, right? So it's a good idea to get those family members through the house and get their approval before you ever make the offer. And then you don't have to write it in, right? Now listen, I see this as kind of, now anybody and anybody's family members can help out with this, but I see that this can be cultural too. I see it more common in Asian cultures, particularly with Indian families, where their extended family members will help out with the money to purchase a house. Okay. And if that's the case, you need to find that out. You need to ask them because it's not always the case, you know, but I do see it more in a culture where in Indian families where the extended family members actually help each other more. And they actually do pool their funds together to purchase a property. And then when it's that other family member's turn to buy a house, they'll pool their funds together again to help them buy a house, you know? So it is more common there. So I will, you know, you should ask this to everybody though, because anybody can have a family member that's helping them with down payment, closing costs, or the money to buy a house, right? It's just I see it more in the Indian cultures. Okay, so but you should ask this to everybody is the bottom line. But if I have clients that are Indian, I'm gonna make it a point to ask it because it is not uncommon at all. I've actually had 3 carloads of family members that needed to give their approval before. And you don't want to write down three carloads of family names that are Indian names that it's like I can't spell it off the top of my head. I got to start looking at how do you spell these names, you know? You want to make sure that they get through that house so that you could submit that contract as contingency as free as possible. You don't got to write anybody's name on the contract, right? So get that 3 carloads of people through the house to give their approval before you write the contract. And then it's not a subject to that you have to add to the contract. It's not a contingency that needs to be added, right?
Right.
And then if you ever do have contingencies added to the contract, the agent, it's your job to ensure, to try to remove those contingencies as soon as possible. That's what ASAP means, as soon as possible. So basically, if let's just say in this situation, I had 3 carloads of people that had to get through that house. I actually still had 2 more people that needed to see it, but they were driving down from Canada. All right. So I had to still put 2 people in the contract as the purchase was subject to these 2 family members' approval who were helping out with the money to purchase the property. All right. And I wrote in there, they're driving down from Canada, so it may take a few days. And then as soon as they drove down, I took them to the house. I met them. I took them to the house. I walked them through. I'm like, is it good? It's good. Called the attorney, remove the contingency. I took them through the house. It's all good. Boom. So we remove those contingencies as soon as possible. All right. So we can continue with the sale. Now, there's a type of contingency that the buyer could put in there that when they're making an offer, sometimes they're selling a house, they have a house to sell before that they could continue with the purchase. Because most people can't afford the payment on 2 mortgages. Would you guys agree that?
Mhm.
Most people can't afford to pay mortgage on 2 houses. A lot of them struggle with mortgage on 1 house, right?
Right.
So you want to make sure if somebody has a house that they need to sell first, that it gets sold. So you want to put a subject to clause, subject to the sale of the buyer's current home at 123 Main Street, and then put the status in the contract, which is currently under contract, awaiting close with an anticipated closing date of whatever. So I'll put as much information like that in this contract for my offer. So at least, if I just say the purchase is subject to the sale of the buyer's current home, the seller's going to be scratching their head. They're going to be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, did they even put it on the market yet?"
Yeah. Right.
You got to give some information. Otherwise, your offer is really not seeming too good right now, right? But if I see, oh, they already got an offer on it and it's just awaiting closing, oh, okay, all right, that's good. Which, by the way, there's a thing for you. By the way, guys, when you got a buyer and you're taking them out to show them properties, you're getting them pre-qualified for a home and all that stuff, ask them this question. Are you ready?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Ask them this important question. Ask them if they have another house to sell.
Mm.
You can get a listing out of it. That would suck if you're helping a buyer out to find a home and then they list their property for sale with another agent.
Yeah, it's true.
Right?
Yeah.
You could ask them, you could help them with that. Look, I've got listings from buyers before. I've got listings at open houses where a buyer came in and they're shopping for a home. And I'm asking, well, what's their timeline? They're like, well, I got to sell my home first. I'm like, oh, you got to sell your home first. But if you
That's a
don't ask these questions, you're never going to know, right?
Yeah.
It's important. You could get listings from the buyers that walk into an open house. A lot of agents aren't even thinking that. They're just thinking, oh, these people are coming in the house. They don't have a house. They're looking to buy one. No, sometimes people got a house and they're looking to move. And, not all family members are not all buyers are renters or are living with family members. Some of them already have a house.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to think about that. All right. Now, if a buyer puts a contract in and they put the subject to the sale of their current home, the seller or the seller's agent can always, if they accept that offer, it's not too uncommon for them to, or at least they should. This will show the agent's experience level here. If you're going to accept an offer from a buyer whose purchase is contingent on a sale of their current home,
Mm-hmm.
an experienced agent would add an escape clause to the contract, or they would insist on the buyer adding an escape clause to the contract.
Mm-hmm.
An escape clause is also known as a kickout or knockout clause. This is a contract where they would accept the buyer's offer, but are allowed to continue marketing the property. And if they find another buyer, give the current one the option of removing the sale of their home as a contingency. And if they can't do that, they could kill the deal and accept the other without being in breach. So give the current one the option of removing the sale of their home as a contingency. If they can't, then seller kills transaction without being in breach. Without being in, damn it, I'm not going to be able to fit all that. See, so the seller's contingency protects the seller. They would accept buyer's offer. But are allowed to continue marketing their property but are allowed to keep their home on the market. There we go. Keep their home on the market. And if they get another offer in writing, if they get another offer in writing, ask buyer to remove contingency or kill the offer or kill the contract to accept the another. Kill the contract to accept another without being in breach of contract. Boom. There we go. That wording works, right?
Mhm.
They would accept the buyer's offer, but are allowed to keep their home on the market. And if they get another offer in writing, ask the buyer to remove the contingency or kill the contract so they could accept the other offer without being in breach of contract. There we go. That's actually that's better definition, I think. Okay. Keep it simple, stupid, right? We don't want any fancy wording there. Escape clause is often on, I don't know if that's in our exam. I know it's on the state exam usually. They refer to it as escape, kick out, or knockout clause. So you guys understand the concept of what that does?
Yep.
All right. And let's see, expiration of the buyer's lease. They could say the property subject to the expiration of my lease because my landlord won't let me out of the lease early.
Okay.
Right? Or the purchase is subject to me getting a permit for using the property for a particular purpose, for zoning, from the zoning, right? This is often what builders do, what developers do when they buy land. They make an offer and they don't close on the sale to purchase the land until they get all the permits when they're doing a subdivision, like where they're going to build maybe hundreds of homes. They buy a piece of raw land, they make an offer on it, goes to attorney review, and even if they're out of attorney review, they're in a legally binding contract to purchase the property. It's subject to them getting all the permits and approvals from the city so that they can build the project. And if through anywhere through that approval process, it falls through, they back out of the contract and they don't purchase the land.
Makes
This
sense.
is very common. This is how we protect the buyer.
Mhm.
Because if they can't get the permits, why do they need the land?
Right.
Right? Subject to them getting a building permit for construction. You know, that's not a bad idea to do, right? Why buy a piece of land with plans to build on it, only to find out you can't get the permit to do so later? Or subject to third-party approval. For instance, if it's a short sale or bankruptcy, you're going to need to get the seller's lender's approval before you could go through with that purchase. All right. Contract contingencies. We have the FHA and VA loans. What's the purpose of that contingency, special contingency clause, anytime somebody's using an FHA or VA loan to purchase?
If that property don't appraise for what the asking price. In other words, if it's lower, it's not worth what they're asking for.
Then they could get out of the contract without, right?
Yeah.
Okay. They can make it subject to engineering reports. They can make it subject to, inspections. They can add an escape clause. They could put in liquidated damage clauses. We've got short sale clauses, all kinds of clauses like that. You could make up clauses for other reasons too. Subject to family members giving their approval who are helping out with the financing, right? I mean, you could add all kinds of clauses that there's no name for them, right? So you could add in subject to family members approval. I mean, you could come up with a lot of different kinds of clauses, right? Oh, that's not how you spell approval, though. All right. So here's some more additional contractual provisions. There's New Jersey does have a plain language requirement that states that any contract for the purchase of real estate in New Jersey has to use words that are common in the English language that don't have a different legalese meaning to them. However, that only applies to properties valued under $50,000. So it's not even a paragraph in this book anymore. I think it's maybe even just a blurb if they even added it. Yep, they did. It's a sentence. Okay, but before we get there, under contingencies, let's go down and we're going to highlight halfway through the second paragraph where you see that line that says contingency in bold. The next sentence we're going to highlight, where the purchaser has another home that must be sold first, the seller may insist on an escape clause, also known as a kick-out or knockout clause. And in the margin next to that, after you highlight that, you're going to write protects the seller. Protects the seller. And then the following paragraph, you're going to highlight the first sentence about liquidated damages is an amount of money agreed to in advance by the buyer and seller that serves as compensation if one of the parties does not live up to the contract. And then we'll turn the page. And that's where you see the plain language requirement thing, nothing to highlight there though. All right, under rescission of a contract, let me see, before we get to that. Okay, rescission of a contract, we know there's a lot of different rescission periods. I probably even got a slide coming up with them again. There we go. So I got that in what, how many chapters did I add that slide to? So the rescission of a contract, it's your right to back out of a contract, right? Within a given period of time. We'll go over that slide in just a moment again. Option agreements, they have to be prepared by attorneys, and these are unilateral contracts where one party is obligated to do something and the other has an option to act or not, right? Right. And then we have land contracts. Ooh, we'll explain this when we get to it. But it's basically a type of seller financing and the buyer has equitable title. But we'll get to it. The full explanation is coming up. So let's first go over those rescission periods. And under rescission of a contract, the second paragraph, just highlight the entire one. The entire second paragraph under rescission of a contract, it's 3 lines. And at the end of that paragraph, you're going to write purchase money mortgage. The words purchase money mortgage. So it basically says borrowers who change their minds, this is what we're highlighting, borrowers who change their mind about a mortgage loan have 3 days to cancel a contract, but that only deals with refinancing. If the mortgage was for refinancing of presently owned property. No right of rescission, however, applies to mortgage loans for the purchase of real estate. And then at the end of that line, you're writing purchase money mortgage. That's what we refer to the entire class of mortgage types that are used to purchase real estate. We refer to them as purchase money mortgages. Any loan used to purchase real estate is called a purchase money mortgage. All right, So here's the different rescission periods now, just before we get on to the option agreements and all that stuff. Rescission is your right to cancel a contract within a given period of time. You got that 7-day calendar right of rescission. We got that 7-day right of rescission for new construction, for out-of-state properties, and a 7-day right of rescission for new construction for in-state properties if they're part of a large subdivision or if there's common area elements involved. There's a 5-day right of rescission for new construction for the discovery of off-site conditions. That's anything that's not on the property. And then the 3-day right of rescission is for resale properties. That's your attorney review period. And like we just highlighted, there's a 3-day right of rescission for mortgage contracts for refinancing property that you currently own. And there's no right of rescission for purchase money mortgages. And what's a purchase money mortgage? Read it backwards. Mortgage, money,
Money,
purchase.
mortgage money purchase.
That's right. Makes it easy to remember, right? Read it backwards. Mortgage, money, purchase. Mortgage, money to purchase.
Is that the only thing that we highlighted in the rescission of the contract? The
Yep.
the bottom paragraph? Okay.
Yep. Now, under option agreements, you could highlight the title. And then in the last line, should be prepared by attorneys.
Under rescission?
Under option agreements,
Oh
you're
yeah.
going to highlight the title, option agreements. And then on the last line of it, you're going to highlight should be prepared by attorneys.
Yeah, that's what rent with the option about.
Right? Any contract that has an option in it has to be written by attorneys. We cannot prepare those kinds of contracts. Those are unilateral, one-sided agreements.
Oh, okay.
If you add an option to a contract, for instance, we could prepare a lease contract, but if we're going to add an option to buy to it,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, in order to add an option, that's a contract in its own. That's a separate agreement on its own. In order for it to be a valid contract, what does it have to have?
Oh, meeting of the minds, both.
What are the 4 essential elements of a valid contract? Competent parties, offer and acceptance,
Consideration.
consideration. So what kind of consideration are we going to add there for the option to buy? There has to be some kind of additional consideration added. And then how is that consideration considered? And if the person doesn't exercise their option to buy, do they get their money back? See, this is why it needs to be added in by attorneys, because it's all this, you really need to know the law on that. Okay, so that's why contracts that have options in them must be prepared by attorneys. We don't prepare leases with option to buy. We can prepare a lease, but we can't prepare the option to buy.
Mhm.
Okay. Land contracts, we're going to highlight that a land contract, sometimes called an installment sales contract. Land contracts are typically used as a means of seller financing. Okay, you guys get that?
Mm-hmm.
Then,
I'm sorry, you said, cause we're skipping contract for deed, cause you just said a land contract is
yes,
sometimes called an installment. Okay.
you're just highlighting land contracts, sometimes called an installment sales contract. Land contracts are typically used as a means of seller financing.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're going to go down in that same paragraph to where it says equitable title in bold. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Just above it, the sentence starts. That's where we're going to
Okay.
highlight from. Although the buyer obtains possession when the contract is signed by both parties and the buyer has equitable title, the seller does not execute and deliver a deed to the buyer until the terms of the contract have been satisfied.
Oh, that's what installments, when you finish it. Oh, okay. Those
So,
installments.
yeah, I created this slide that explains it a little bit clearer than what they got here. So what is a land contract? Well, first of all, we didn't get to chapter 12 yet that talks about ground leases, but this sometimes people mix these two things up. So I put here on the first line, land contracts, do not confuse them with what a ground lease is. A ground lease is when you lease somebody's property and you construct a building on it, okay? Sometimes people mix that up with a land contract, okay? So anyway, a land contract is a type of seller financing, also known as an installment sales contract, kind of like a lease to own, where the buyer makes payments in installments and they wait for the deed. I got that worded backwards. Where the buyer makes payments in installments and waits for the deed. The owner does not turn over the deed to the buyer. The owner does not turn over the deed to the buyer until the full purchase price or an agreed upon amount has been paid. Until the buyer pays off the full amount, they do not get ownership. However, they do have a financial interest in that property through the payments that they've been making, called equitable title. Even though they don't own the real estate yet, they do have a financial interest in the ownership. Even though they don't own the real estate yet.
So that seller is financing for them,
Now, I also have a note here about equity and what equity is. Come on, man. What is equity? Equity is the difference between the market value on the property and what's owed on it. Right? So as they're making these periodic payments to the seller, they're building equity in the property. Equity towards the ownership. What does the word title mean? Ownership, right? So they have equitable title. So what if this buyer renter making installment payments, what if they stop making payments? Something happens and they stop making payments.
I was going to ask you that question.
Well, they cannot be evicted because they're not a tenant. And they don't quite get foreclosed on because they're not an owner. So it's harder to get them out than a renter, easier to get them out than foreclosure. But what happens to the money that they paid and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Are you ready for this answer? You're not going to like it. I don't know.
Oh, God.
The reason I don't know is these contracts are custom written between the parties. So it's whatever terms they put into their contracts. So sorry, I don't know. The book can't address it either. There's no way to know. It's whatever the attorneys agreed upon, the parties agreed upon, how they wrote it in the contract. All right. Well, land contract you'll get on exams. What is it? It's a type of seller financing where they don't turn over the ownership to the buyer until they paid off the full amount owed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's almost like purchasing a vehicle.
And then when it's completed, you get the title.
Get that title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas normally, if you're going to buy a house, you make that offer, you purchase it, you go through closing, you're given the deed right away.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're making payments over the next 30 years to the bank for the money that they laid out for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Instead, there is seller financing like that too, where you could be making payments to the seller instead of a bank. You're making that when the seller's financing it.
Right.
But this is a different type of seller financing. This isn't just seller financing.
Mm-hmm.
This is a land contract. Land contract, also known as an installment sales contract, because you're
Mhm.
making payments in installments and waiting for the deed
Right.
rather than getting the deed and making the payments in installments.
Right.
And with that, let's see, we could go and prepare this contract now and try writing up this contract. I gave you guys a couple resources here. And I created this link here, njrforms.com. It's a shortcut to the realtor's contract form system that you get as part of your membership, which basically forwards you to this, njrealtor.com/zip form. You could just type in njforms.com. It's easier to remember. I always forget this one. So I bought a domain name and I forwarded it to njrealtor.com/zip forms. Okay, here, I'll show you guys. So if I click on njforms.com here, which by the way, this is in the Word document, the Word class links folder too. If I click on that, where did it just take me in the web browser? njrealtor.com/zip forms. So I gave you both of those links here in this, and it's in the Word document. And then there's also every MLS that you're a member of is going to give you access to a tax record database or system. Here's a free one. I made a shortcut for you guys, tinyurl.com/NJ tax records. This is the one I've been to a couple of times. You guys seen it was a really long link. You couldn't really save it. Here's a shortcut to it that I made. It's called tinyurl.com. That's a website where you could shorten links, like when you want to send them to people. And I put this name at the end of it, NJ Tax Records. I actually bought a domain for it too. I just haven't set it up yet. So if I were to click on this, it takes me, oops, wrong link. It takes me here. Right? tax.tax1.co.monmouth.nj.us/CGI bin blah 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 blah. So you can see why I put a URL shortener there to shorten the website address name, right?
Yeah.
And now you can do tax record search here. You seen, remember we even went to those the tax auction software when they referenced it. Sometimes they take that information from the same database too. So what I want to do is, when I'm preparing a contract for a buyer, I'm going to want to pull up the contract form system. This is a tool you pay for with your realtor dues. Okay. This is the contract form system. I would log in here. Basically software from Zip Forms that it's included in our realtor dues. You don't have to pay monthly. It used to be in the past, if you wanted the software, you had to pay for it. You get it for free with your, it's a digital contract form system that includes, so you could prepare contracts for sending off for digital signatures and stuff like that. Your clients, you could prepare a profile for your clients. And now when you're going to be sending contracts out to them, let's just, or you're going to print out a contract for their signature. Let's just say that you screwed something up or they did negotiations and you need to change something in the contract. Well, you could just go back to their profile, open up that contract that you already have saved in there and just make a modification instead of having to start from scratch again, and then print out a new contract or prepare it for digital signatures and send it out.
That's good.
Learn how to use our free integrated tenant screening tool. Rent spree. Oh, look at this. Okay, so that's a new tool they got there. Okay, well, that's neat. All right, I'll look at that later. All right, so, and then you could prepare a contract. So basically you could go to a template, or you could just look at their forms, or you could go to one of your contacts where you could add a contact, and then you would prepare contracts for them. All right, you can take a look at all the forms they got just by clicking on forms. And you see there's different databases here of forms I have in here, but we're going to do the ones from New Jersey Association of Realtors. And you see there's all these forms here. Sellers concessions that you're asking for, short sale form, underground fuel tank forms and issues. There's different versions of the CIS, Consumer Information Statement here, exclusive buyer agency agreement forms. Here's one for your protection, get a home inspection. You know, if you got a buyer that doesn't want to get a home inspection for whatever reason, even though you advise them to, always get them to sign some sort of a document that you had advised them to and they rejected it, so that they can't come after you later and say, oh, well, you told me I didn't need an inspection. You know, they're basically lying, you know. Hold harmless agreements. There's, okay, you get informed consents to dual agency, the lead paint disclosure. See, all these contracts and forms that we need, they're all in here. Leases, purchase contracts. All kinds of stuff. All right. So that's where
Why
I
are
get
there
the
different
contract.
versions of the CIS form? 3 different CIS forms.
They got 3 or 4 different versions of it in there.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just the layout of it, and the wording's a little bit different. Like one may be, yeah, they got different versions. I always just use the A version.
oh, okay. So
A,
the
B, C. I'm not even sure what all these different versions are for.
oh,
I always use the A. The other ones will look a little bit different.
uh-huh. Okay.
I
was just wondering. I thought it was just
like this one. Where's the signature line? No signature lines on this one. You know, back to forms. No. Let's see if I can just pull a preview so I don't got to do this every time. See, the regular one is, let's preview the form. See if that looks better. See, this one has this is the typical one that you see, you know, it's got all the signature lines that you fill out, you check boxes that other one didn't have.
oh, right.
You know, there's differences between them, but I always just use the A one. I use the standard one.
Okay.
And then you're going to want to pull up the tax record for a property, because you're going to need to get lot and block number if it's not in the MLS itself, which it should be. I also open up another window that I'm going to have the MLS open for the listing for that property, because you're going to want to print that out and make the listing, especially if you're referring to something in the listing, in the contract. You want to make the MLS listing print out as part of the contract as well. So basically you're going to have quite a few windows open. You're going to have one for the contracts, one for tax records, one for the MLS, and another one where you're going to be on the Real Estate Commission's website, because the new contracts, the laws changed a bit that require us to put the agency's license number, the agent's license numbers. So you're going to need to get their license numbers. So instead of pestering people, you just go here. Here's another shortcut that I made. tinyurl.com/NJRE license search. This is the same link that I told you when you first, how do you know when you could work when you're licensed? Well,
Right,
once your name is showing up in this database, you're now licensed and you can
Right.
work. But that's where you would go and you could research the agent's name and then get their license information for them and their company. Remember this one? We're on a DOBI's website, and you could search their name to get their information. You get their, see, the reference number is the license number. This is the employer reference number. So that's the company's reference number, and the reference number, just the one that's listed reference number, that's the agent's license number. Okay. You're going to need the company's address and all that stuff. So you basically click on it. You know, you get the company's information, their information, the company's license number, all that stuff, because you're going to need to put that stuff into the contract itself. It's a new requirement. Legislation requires that. Thank you, politicians, for that too.
Mm,
All right. And make sure that when you're preparing this contract, you at least at minimum got a pre-qualification letter for the buyer. But it's always best to have a pre-approval letter when making offers, especially if you've got a multi-offer situation. It gives you a better negotiation stance, right? When presenting the offer. If they're a cash buyer, you know, you need to get a proof of funds letter from their bank, or tell them to get a proof of funds letter from their bank. I don't need to know how much money that you have in the bank. I just need to know that you have enough to complete this purchase.
Right,
Somebody's saying, I'm buying all cash. You don't need to worry about it. Oh no, I worry about it. I'm worried about it. Not all people got that money. I need you to show me the money.
Victor,
Yeah.
the pre-approval letters, how far dated back would you accept?
I mean, don't go a year back or anything like that. I mean, keep it 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, okay.
You know? And then it still should be good. When it comes to, you said with the pre-approval letter, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. With proof of funds letter, you want that recent.
Oh, yeah,
They could have spent
definitely.
that money a long time ago, you know?
Mhm.
Now, I don't need to see how much money that you have in the bank. A proof of funds letter is a standard bank manager that all banks have it.
Right.
You go to the bank manager, you say, hey, listen, I need a proof of funds letter. So
Mhm.
it's usually only the bank manager that fills this out.
Mhm.
They will do it. They'll pull out the form and they'll fill it out. They'll see how much money that you have in the bank, and they'll say how much you need the letter to be made out for.
Okay.
Because you don't need to show people how much money you have.
Uh-huh.
If you're buying a $300,000 house, I just need to show that you got $300,000 to complete this
Mhm.
purchase. That you got sufficient funds. Maybe show a little more. You got 310, 320, you know?
Right.
So put on that proof of funds letter, you know, however much money that you need to show. And then the bank manager will confirm and verify that those funds are in the bank. They'll
Mhm.
sign it, they'll date it, they'll stamp it, they put a raised seal on it, you know, to show that it's legit.
Right.
Okay. Now, if the property was built prior to 1978, we're going to need that lead paint addendum that was already filled out by the seller, the owner of the property.
Right.
So go to the MLS. Another reason to have the MLS open. When the MLS is open, you can, sometimes with the images, we can upload documents, you know, seller property condition disclosure, the lead paint addendum. We can just download it from there and give it to the buyer, let them go over this stuff and let them sign it. If it's not, if the agent did not upload it, it's a pain in the ass. Now you got to call that agent up, say, hey, I'm trying to prepare a contract. I need you to send me that either email or fax over the seller's property condition disclosure and the lead paint addendum. And now you got to deal with the other agent. Oh, well, I'm in my car right now. I already left for the day. I'll get it to you tomorrow. And you're like, oh. All right. So you could finish filling out the contract and stuff, but you're not going to get anything else done until you get that paperwork from them. So you're probably going to have to follow up with that agent a couple times in order to get it. And then after you get it, then you call your client up to meet with them.
Mm-hmm.
so that they can do the signing of the paperwork. Okay.
Hmm.
And then you got to find out who all the, if they accept the offer, then you need to get the buyer and seller's attorney's information, right? And put that all together there.
Have you ever had any problem getting certain things from agents that they should hand over?
Yeah, sometimes they're a pain in the butt to try to chase them around to get their what do you call it? The paperwork from them. Yeah. Hold on for me just for 1 second, please.
Mhm.
I got a call I got to get here. Just hold on 1 second. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so the mortgage commitment letter is to be produced 30 to 45 calendar days from the date of contract. All right, these are some dates that we need to put in the contract. So basically here, if you go to the contract, go to the first page of this contract in the book. I'm going to just show you really quick how to fill out a contract.
What page?
First page of the contract, 175. And I'll also put it up on screen here. Here's the contract that we have. I'm gonna put it back up on screen. Here's the first page of the contract. Here's how to navigate the contract. As you can see the different sections of it. Sections are numbered. By the way, you see how on the contract there are page numbers here along the left side?
Mhm.
Mhm.
You guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, line numbers. There's line
Mhm.
numbers here on the left side.
Mhm.
All right. These line numbers are very useful tools. Attorneys usually use them during attorney review. They say, okay, well, we're gonna delete section 3, or they're gonna make a modification to section 3, or they'll say to delete lines 54 and 55, and replace them with this, So this is how a lot of times that they do these modifications during attorney review. They're referencing these line numbers. Now, as far as we're concerned, when we're first preparing contracts and sending them over to other parties or receiving them, your job, the first thing you should do before you ever read the contract is look at the end, look at the last line on the first page. It's 50, right?
Mhm.
So what should the number be on the next page?
51.
51.
They should be consecutive, and do that. Check every page. 111, next one should be 112. Boom.
Mhm.
What you're
Oh.
doing is you're making sure that when the agent scanned the contract or faxed it or emailed it, that
Mhm.
none of the contract got cut off.
Right.
You want to make sure that you have a complete contract there that you're signing. All right. If not, you're gonna have to call the other agent and tell them, hey, contract got cut off. You need to rescan it and send it again.
Mhm.
Which, by the way, let me give you guys a little tip in case of it being in a pinch, or not being a pinch, but I find it more convenient. I got a scanner right here. I got a printer, fax machine, scanner, all in one machine right here. You got software you got to pull up on a computer. You got to scan it. It takes a while to do. It takes a little longer to do. Even though it's a fast scanner, it still takes a while for it to process after it scans everything in the computer and then convert it to a PDF. I found something pretty neat. There's an app that you could get in my real estate apps folder. Let me take a look. Oh, actually, I don't have that in my real estate apps folder. I got it in my utilities folder. All right. So in my utilities folder, I have an app called Adobe Scan.
Oh, yeah.
Free application called Adobe Scan. You guys see that? It's called Adobe Scan. I don't know if you're getting it. All right. Anyway, it's called
Adobe
Adobe Scan. You could get it from the Apple Store. You could get it from the Google Play Store. When you open up this Adobe scanner, it uses the camera on your cell phone, and you just hold it as steady as possible. If you don't have a steady hand, this ain't gonna work, okay? You hold it as steady as possible in a well-lit area so that you don't got shadows casted.
Mhm.
And you have the paper that you want to scan under you. And it'll have these 4 dots that try to locate the edges, the corners of the paper. And once it locates them, it'll snap a picture of it. And then you have the option to adjust where the corners are by dragging them on your cell phone. You know, you could do regular size paper, legal size paper, it doesn't matter. So you don't have to set it up in settings like you do with the scanner. Okay, it's a real neat tool. You could scan small pieces of paper, big pieces of paper. You find it automatically finds the edges, and even if it's off a little bit, it doesn't detect it right. You could drag it and square it out properly. All right, and then you could add another page. So you could either hit complete, and then it turns it into a PDF document that you could then email to people directly from your cell phone, or you can add another page, add another page, add another page, all the pages of the contract. Okay, it makes it real easy. All right. Okay, let's see. So the mortgage commitment letter has to be produced should be produced within 30 to 45 days. So the mortgage commitment letter is different than a pre-qualification or pre-approval. First step is pre-qual, then you work towards getting the pre-approval. And then the lender, after the buyer submits a loan application and they get an appraisal done, all their bank statements, tax returns, all that stuff is in, all the inspection stuff for the property is in. The underwriter at the bank will then issue a mortgage commitment letter, but we're going to put a date on here, 30 to 45 days from the date of contract that it should be submitted. So basically here, when we fill out these contracts, you guys can see the contract?
Yeah.
Buyer's information, it's self-explanatory. Look, the buyer's information goes here, right, in this section. And their current address, wherever they live, goes right here. Not the property's address that they're buying. Then they're agreeing to purchase from, the seller's information goes here, and their current property address where they live here, which could be different than the house that they're selling. The house that they're selling goes here. See this?
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's where you just put the address without the name of the city. The name of the city goes on the line below it. It goes right. The name of the city goes right here, where it says the municipal tax map of.
Mm-hmm.
But do not forget to put the county name.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important to put the county name here. So I'm going to have you guys highlight where it says county name here. Do not leave that blank ever. We have cities in New Jersey that share the same name, but they're in different counties.
Yep, true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we got to put a contract together and know which property we're putting it together for. So we're also going to have to go to the tax records, or if it's not, in the MLS. So one or the other, MLS or tax records, to get the lot and block number of the property. And we write that down there as well. Now, this contract that we're going to prepare, we're going to set it up for a $300,000 purchase price. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
So on the line where it says purchase price, write $300,000 there. And we're going to use an FHA loan for this too. That's the Federal Housing Administration loan. I know we didn't go over loan types yet because the mortgage chapters are coming up. So $300,000. And then the initial deposit we're going to make is, what did I tell you before? $1,000, right? Good faith deposit. you'd put that on the next line where it says initial deposit. Now, if a person is purchasing a property and they're using an FHA loan, what's the minimum down payment requirement? Anybody know?
3%. Well, is it 3%?
3.5%, 3.5%.
Okay.
So if it's a $300,000 home times 3.5%, that's $10,500. However, we already put $1,000 down. So subtract $1,000. The balance that they need to put down for the second deposit, or they could break it into 2 deposits. See additional deposit, $9,500. So it's a little simple math. Now, if you're actually filling out this contract on the Zip Forms website, when you plug in the numbers, it does the math automatically for you.
Oh, wow.
In the past, it did not, but now it does. Okay. So that's neat. You don't even need to know simple math anymore. And then this will tell you what the balance of the mortgage is that the buyer needs to qualify for. So that pre-approval letter or cash that they need is going to be that amount. Right? Well, not cash. Cash you wouldn't put on this line. That's the mortgage. If it's cash, you would put that on the next line. The balance of the purchase price they need to bring to closing, the cash, right? Or if they didn't have all this $9,500 for the additional second deposit to put down here, they could put like $5,000 there, and then they would need to bring how much more to closing? $4,500. Then they would put that here as the balance of the purchase price. If you don't put a balance of the purchase price in here, then over here it's going to be showing on the mortgage line that it's going to add another $4,000 there or $4,500 to that. And then don't forget, very important, make sure the buyers and sellers initial the bottom. And then we go to the next page. Manner of initial deposit, how did they pay it? Well, they paid it to the participating broker. We're going to select that one. You're the participating broker if you're the buyer's agent there. And then any additional money that they need for that second deposit, they want you to write a date on this line. And if you leave the date blank, they say, well, then within 10 calendar days after the signed contract. No, I like to put down 10 days after attorney review. That gives them more time to come up with the money. 10 days after the signed contract, well, I've seen properties stay in attorney review for more than 10 days. And then if it's still in an attorney review, then you're not even in a legally binding contract yet. Now you're required to put down that additional deposit already. Sometimes buyers will bitch and complain about that because they want they're like, hey, listen, we don't even know if the offer is, going to go through here yet. I like to keep the money in my bank earning interest. I'm like, all right, whatever. Because our escrow account is not interest bearing, right? So I wrote down here. So I made a habit of just putting in here. I actually write the days. I don't put a date on that line. I write the date. I write this statement. I write 10 days after attorney review. Okay. And that's on line what? 57. And then in this next section here, escrow, well, that the money that they give us, where are we putting it?
In escrow.
Well, we're giving it to the broker and he's putting it in his escrow account, right? The non-interest bearing account of, and you're going to put down your company's name, your agency name here. Now, it is also possible that you could give that money to one of the attorneys, maybe the buyer's attorney, and put it in their bank. Well, if that's the case, you don't put down the attorney's name here, because often the escrow accounts are not in the attorney's name. They're in their law firm's name. You got to find out which, if you're doing that. Okay. And then you got to put that correct information here in that line. Now, once again, this is the section for the mortgage. I told you, so the balance of that mortgage that they need to get qualify for is that, what's that, 289.5? We write it there on this line. It's the same thing that was on this line up here, right? You're just moving it down here.
Hmm.
It'd be neat if they automated the form to automatically fill that in. And then we're going to check out the type of loan that the buyer's using. I told you it's going to be an FHA, so let's check off FHA here. And then the common type of loan is a 30-year. So I'm just going to write in here 30-year mortgage with based on 30-year payment schedule. And then this next line is when the buyer needs to get the mortgage commitment letter from their bank by. And what did I tell you? 30 to 45 calendar days from the dates of the contract. So I'm going to actually put, and make sure it lands on a business day. All right. Bank's not going to be sending anything to you on weekends, right? So I'm counting calendar days, but I'm going to make sure that I'm writing a business day on this line. So look at you got to pull out a calendar on your computer maybe, or on your cell phone. Make sure it's not a holiday. Make sure it lands on a business day and not a weekend. And count straight through 45 calendar days, or 30 or 45, 30 to 45 calendar days, and write that here. Okay. 45 days is sufficient. If you don't write anything, it's going to be 30. See that? 30 calendar days if you leave it blank. So once again, I don't like leaving lines blank. So I'll count 30 days or 45 days. But actually, this is not bad what they have here, though. See what they got written now? I just noticed this. They wrote within 30 calendar days after the attorney review period is complete. That's actually even better.
Oh, yeah. It's saying basically what you were saying after.
Yeah, but they're not writing 30 to 45 calendar days from the date of contract, but 30 to
Right
45
after
calendar days
review.
after attorney review.
Attorney review.
So this line, you're probably better off leaving blank. If blank within 30 calendar days. So mortgage commitment letter, 30 to 45 calendar days from date of contract. Let's update this and let's just put that from attorney review, because that's even better. 30 to 45 calendar days from date of, from completion of attorney review. And then for the closing date, you want that closing date then to be 45 to 60 calendar days. Make sure it lands on a business day. Now, you're doing these from date of contract or from date of completion of attorney review. If you do the same thing here, though, it would be more conforming, but you have less control. If you want to control more where the calendar date, where the closing day ends, because a lot of times buyers want to know that too, especially if they follow Feng Shui or Vastu principles. They may say certain numbers are unlucky for them, so they don't want to close on a certain day. It has to have, depending on the date, to the number of the calendar. Sometimes people are superstitious, you know, so you'd have to write down the actual date, you know, that they wanted. But if you're going to put down the date for the closing date on the, if you're going to be putting down the closing date on the on the contract,
Mhm.
45 to 60 calendar days. And then you're gonna make sure it lands on a business day for the closing.
Mhm.
If that ends at the beginning of a month, push it forward a few days. You want to finish it at the end of the month. If you got the closing set for the end of the month, instead of like, if it's landing on the 2nd or 3rd or something like that, push it forward just a few days so that you
Mhm.
close at the end of a month. Because if you manage to close at the end of the month, if you got it set for the end of the month, banks will make that a little bit more of a priority, your transaction, and they'll kind of push it through a little bit more, you know?
Mhm.
Whereas if you make it at the beginning of the month, they're like, oh, we got all month to close on that. Just a little tip there, okay? So this is typically how long that it takes to close a real estate transaction, about 45 to 60 days. I would stay closer to the 60 days. You don't want to make everything a rush. I mean, you can technically close as soon as 30 days. I've done it before, but it's a lot harder now, especially with new laws and regulations and such. Obama created this agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and they put all these new timelines in and stuff that are supposed to make things quicker and smoother. They actually make things longer. They actually have dates that require extensions automatically added if certain changes are made. So typically it's taking even longer to close. So I would stay at that 60-day spectrum there towards that end. Okay. So that would be here on line 94, 95. This is the area right here where you put the closing dates. Okay, see closing date, and then this just continues onto the next line. So this is where you would put the date of closing. Make sure that lands on a business day. If it's going to land at the beginning of the month, push it forward a few days to land at the end. But try to give it as much time as possible. Okay. And sometimes you could let the sellers know that this date is flexible. If it is flexible, you may want to point that out to them when submitting the offer to get accepted. I've had offers accepted where my offer was not the highest offer, but because I pointed out that they were flexible in the closing date, the seller saw that as something valuable in order to, if they needed more time for packing and getting their stuff out or whatever, they were like, no, we could use that. That could be good for us, if we're not being rushed. So they actually accepted my offer instead, which was lower.
How would you put that in wording after you put a date?
Well, I would put the actual date in there.
The date in there.
Yeah, I put the actual date in there. And when presenting the offer, I told them verbally, that we're flexible. We have a little flexibility in that closing date if needed. But I had that conversation first with the buyer.
Right.
Sure that's true. Okay. All right. And then don't forget the bottom of each one of these contracts, the initials, right? All right. Now this next section, item 6, section 6, items included in this sale. You see here by line number 115, where they got the big blank line here. I wrote in here per MLS number, and I put an MLS number there. You could write in all the items that are specifically included in the sale that the seller wrote on the seller property condition disclosure sheet, or on the or they added into the MLS listing. If they added it in the MLS listing, I'll just, instead of having to retype everything, I'll just write per MLS, and I'll print out the MLS listing and I'll make it a part of the contract.
That's good.
You could, and if they also mention those things in the seller condition property disclosure report, I'll write per MLS listing and seller property condition disclosure report. And then what else do I need to make a part of the contract now?
The disclosure report.
The disclosure report, exactly, right? So this stuff isn't really rocket science, is it? Now, if any items are going to be excluded from the sale, you're gonna write the same thing. If they wrote that in the MLS, you'll write per MLS number. Or you may want to write down the exact things, whichever way you want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But look, let's just say that they didn't write anything in the MLS. But I was speaking to their agent, or their agent called me up and they
Mhm.
said, hey, I forgot to write it in the listing. I may add it later, but I forgot to write it. But I want to tell you right now that the chandelier is not included. The seller's taking the chandelier with them.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I made this little note. Plus any items the listing agent specifically excluded. You're not writing that in the contract. You're going to write in the contract chandelier, okay? Because the agent told you the chandelier is not included. So you're writing that in the contract. So now when the buyer's signing the contract before they ever submit it to the seller, it
Right.
says chandelier is excluded from the sale. Because you don't want it to become an issue later.
Right.
They already told you that it's not. So you know it's going to become an issue. Why are you insisting on something that they told you is not included, right? So that's where you put things that are included or excluded specifically from the sale. All right. And then a lot of these other things, we're not going to go over all the additional issues. Over here, you should probably just leave this one blank here. Now, 1.5% would be more than $800, but attorneys may knock that down a bit. But I put 1.5. I would leave it blank for that 1.5%. But I'm going to tell you, 9 times out of 10, an attorney's probably going to change it to like $800. Municipal assessments. What do we call the tax, the improvement tax?
Assessment tax.
A
tax.
special assessment, a special
Yeah,
assessment.
special
So
assessment.
if there is no special assessment outstanding, you would check off here. If there is, you would check off here, right?
Mhm.
Mm.
Quality of title. This is just ensuring that the seller is going. See, this used to be a blank line, and we used to have to write in what type of title that we're asking for or expecting from the seller. We don't do that anymore. They just automatically, because a lot of agents were putting the wrong crap in there, I guess. This is the most common one used in New Jersey anyway. So we're writing bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors acts. I know it says or other deeds satisfactory to the buyer. You know, that's kind of dopey, but I would
Mm.
always write this one in.
Let me ask you a question. For the special assessment, you selling, you're in the process of selling and buying, you showing, and they're actually digging up on that block. So when you said, because you said if it's no special assessment, put no or X, right? Check X or yes or no, correct?
Yeah. Is there or isn't there?
Okay, so at the time, okay, so the person is purchasing the home. They're in the process of,
Wait. Look. Not been notified of any special assessment. Have you been notified or have you not been notified?
oh, okay.
All right.
Oh, if you've been, yeah, okay.
And look, even if you've been notified, I may want to write in there, you know, that the seller is responsible for clearing it up.
Mm-hmm.
See, it may even say that in here already. Let's see, all confirmed assessments and all unconfirmed assessments that have been or may be imposed by the municipality for improvements that have been completed as of the closing are to be paid in full by the seller
Mm-hmm.
or credited to the buyer if the buyer has to pay it because the seller is not going to. At least the buyer will get a credit towards the purchase price. So they'll get their money back one way or another. So whose responsibility is that? It's the seller's responsibility to pay for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an outstanding tax they didn't pay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those questions too. Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right. And over here, you're going to put down, is this a one family? I wrote single here, but you could write 1, 2, 3, 4. You're not writing any more than 4, right?
Right.
Because we can only prepare contracts for 1 to 4 family, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
But you're going to write down here what it's legally zoned as. You're not going to write if it has a bonus, the bonus apartment, you know, the illegal apartment. You're not going to write down that it's a 2 family. It's
Right.
zoned 1 family. You're putting here what it's zoned. You want to look, you
Right.
want to get sued? You know, you put false information on the contract. You want to have your license in jeopardy? Go ahead, put false information there on the contract. Are there any tenants involved? Yes or no? If there are, then you would have to put down the tenant's name, what location, like what unit that they're renting in, how much they pay for rent, how much the security deposit do they have on file, and what is their term? When does their lease end? Start date, end date. Okay. It's important to get this information because any security deposit on file would need to be turned over to the would-be buyer, because they would then become the landlord and responsible for returning the security deposit when the tenant moves out, if there's no damages, right? Right, Vic? Okay, cool. Now, over here, you can also check off, was the property built prior to 1978 or after, or not, or after? If after, it's not applicable, right?
Right.
Okay, and here's all that stuff. Okay, so I'm not going to go through everything. They talk about cesspools, inspections, and all that. We don't need to fill in all that stuff. Let's go down to where we do need to. Here's all the airports in New Jersey, if the property's in the airport flight path safety zone. Here's the declaration of business relationships, who our agency's representing, and you see how I have the license number here. And then here's where you put each agency again, and the agent's name and license numbers, right? Rec license number, the one I showed you, not the one from the MLS, because different agents have real estate login IDs in the MLSs. It's not what they're looking for. They're looking for their real estate license number here. That's why they put rec license number. And then the participating firm, that's you. If you're preparing this, you're working for the buyer, you would put down all that information in here. Commission that you're due, or that's due to the listing firm, the commission that's due to the participating firm. Where would you get that from? The MLS listing.
Yeah.
It'll be in the MLS listing. So this is an important section here. It has all the agency's information. That's why you would be on the Real Estate Commission's website here to get all their information, right? That's where you get all that information that you would then be putting here. And you'd also have the MLS open from the listing to find out what the commission is that you're going to be paying there or getting. They talk about liens a little bit. Okay, don't forget, initial everything. Disclosures that here, if you are purchasing for yourself or selling for yourself, it used to be we had to write it into the contract. They now have a section here where you would check off applicable or not applicable. Is the buyer or seller a licensee? You'd have to check that off here and then check off, put your name, and then what license type do you have?
Sales person.
Yep. All right. And then at the end of the contract, here's where we would check off any additional addenda. This is an FHA loan. So they would have to have the FHA special addendum added to the contract. And what does that addendum say?
The FHA.
What's the purpose of that special addendum clause for FHA and VA loans?
Contingent?
It says if the property does not appraise for the purchase price, the buyer can get out of the contract without penalty.
Okay.
And remember, if the primary source of drinking water is coming from a private well, you got to have that the well testing.
Oh, that's under the contingency. That's with FHA. Okay, I see it.
Oh, addendas here. Okay. These are any addendas. Addenda is anything that you're adding to the contract in a separate document, perhaps. Okay. If the property is built prior to 1978, you got to have that separate lead paint addendums, right? If they're a member of if it's a condominium, there's HOA, there's additional documents that's going to be needed. right? If you're adding the coronavirus addenda to it, that's an additional contract rider or add-on that we could add there. If we're asking for a seller's concession in a separate document, we could check that off here. Often what I do is instead of putting it in a separate document, I just write it here. Additional contractual provisions, if any. You see this big blank spot? I would ask for the seller to pay the buyer's closing costs or to contribute towards repairs or something. If it's a short sale, some people could just put short sale clauses in here. I personally have a separate document that's a long document for that. So I would check this off on mine and add that document. See, this is for any attached documents that are to be added to the contract that are not being written in right here. If you want to ask for the even though it's not included in the listing, if you want to ask and see if the seller can include the washer and dryer in the sale, you could write in here, buyer requests that seller include the washing machine and dryer in the sale. What's the worst they say? No? Okay. All right. And then they sign, they date, and that's that. So I do have here on the slide how to ask for these things. So on this next slide here, you see it says never leave a blank line on a contract. You could write NA, unless those blank lines would put dates in there for you. Contract must state the amount of down payment the buyer's making, as well as any additional amounts, mortgages they need to qualify for. You check off the type of loan. If the person's using a conventional loan, typically they require 20% down payment. But you got to check what their mortgage pre-approval letter says. Okay. FHA typically requires 3.5% minimum down. Could the buyer put down more?
Yes, he can.
Okay, so you need to find out from them how much they're putting down. One thing you know is the minimum that they need to put down. So don't prepare this contract for them without talking to them and discussing it. How much money are you putting down with the purchase? You know, if they ask you, well, how much do I got? Well, you got to put down at least the minimum that the mortgage loan requires. For FHA, it's how much? 3.5%.
3.5%.
Now, if it's a conventional loan, typically conventional loans require 20% down. So we would have to calculate 20% of $300,000 and put that down there. You know, 20%, 300,000 times 20%, $60,000.
Now, juice.
Unless the lender requires less of a down payment. Okay. VA loans typically require 0 down payment. It's 100% financing, but the local lender may ask them to put some money down, and then they would get a credit for that money back at closing. Okay. A concession, the word concession means that somebody's giving up. Yeah, we just went to when you have elections, often you have a concession speech that may be given, all right, that where the person sees, if it's not contested, you know, there's a concession speech where the person's saying, all right, I see there's no way for me to win. I'm conceding the election to the other person, right? Well, it's the same thing. That means that they're giving it up. With concession, you're asking the seller, a seller's concession, you're asking the seller to give up money to the buyer for something, for either to help pay the buyer's closing costs or towards repairs. Now, the maximum that you could ask for, if they're using an FHA or VA loan, is 6%, and the maximum you could ask for a conventional loan is 3%. So in this area of the contract, at the end of the contract, in that big blank area, you should write in here, maximum seller concession allowed. In that big area, you're going to write maximum seller concession allowed, and just write this, maximum seller concession allowed, FHA and VA, 6%, conventional, 3%. And just know, typical closing costs are 2 to 3% of the purchase price.
Hmm.
But the seller's concession is based on the loan amount, not the purchase price. Maximum seller concession allowed is 6% or 3% of the loan amount. You know what? Let me clarify that. Sometimes
you.
people may ask, of what? 6% of what? Right? And then we'll just make a little note here for you that closing costs are typically 2 to 3% of the purchase price. That's a guesstimate. Or I'm gonna put guesstimated. You like my language? I got my own
Yeah.
language I speak in. It's guesstimated.
We understand it.
It's easy to figure out.
Yeah.
All right, now here's how to write a couple common clauses, because people often ask me, well, how would you write this in? Well, your broker should help you with this stuff. But look, this is how to ask for a seller's concession. You know, you would write in something like, buyers requesting a seller concession of up to 3% towards the buyer's closing cost and prepaids. This is a concession and not a loan. Okay, so that's the typical way that you would ask. You could write, let's see, for a short sale, if it's a short sale, you could, I have a whole document of clause, the whole document is a short sale clause. But you guys could put in something just as simple as just writing this in. This is a short sale, purchase price and approval, purchase price and approval, purchase price, approval and commission subject to third-party approval. Now, only if the seller specifies would you add this there, because the seller is usually responsible for these expenses. So only if the seller says, I'm not paying these things, the buyer has to pay it. You would write as well, buyer's responsible for obtaining CO and fire certificates. Okay, and that's usually the case though, when it's a short sale, but I still don't write it in unless they specify it, because I want the seller to be responsible for that crap. And then the buyer's home sale contingency clause. This is when they have a house that they already need to sell. You know, you could write in something like this: purchase subject to sale of buyer's current home at 123 Main Street, Woodbridge, New Jersey, which is currently under contract with an anticipated closing date of whatever. Okay, you could write it in like that. Or for approvals, you know, purchase subject to buyer's relatives of viewing a home and approving of purchase. They will be contributing money towards the purchase price. Right? So, I mean, you could see, you could make this wording up. You know, it doesn't have to be any kind of standard wording. This is obviously wording I just made up from the fly of my head, right? From the top of my head here. Okay. All right, and that's it for this chapter. Chapter 11 is done. Let me update those slideshows.
What time you leave today, Victor? 12 o'clock?
Yeah, noontime. Yep.
And then she'll come after we take lunch, 1
Yeah,
o'clock?
she'll come. Yeah, she'll be back at 1 to take over from there from 1 to 4:30.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so. Let me see. Okay, what was I doing? Okay, I gotta update that slideshow in the Google Drive. And then I'll open up chapter 12 and we got half an hour to get started of chapter 12.
Okay.
So let me just update chapter 11 slideshow. Boom. And chapter 11 slideshow is updated in the shared Google Drive. All right. All right. Chapter 12, leases. Okay, this chapter we're going to be learning about the 4 types of leasehold estates. What are the 3 types of ownership estates? So, wait, first of all, what do we call the category of estates that describe ownership? You guys recall that?
What's that? We talking about the fee simple and the simple and the
Fee simple, absolute. Then we have fee determinable, also known as the feasible fee. And then we also have a life estate. And what do we call a life estate based on someone else's life? Por otra vie, a life
Yeah, I was
estate
gonna say
por
por otra vie.
otra vie.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, I forgot to go over one thing. Let's do the key terms to review in chapter 11 first, okay? So page 192. 192, key terms to review, page 192. Ready? On your marks? Get set? Here we go. Agreement between 2 parties to perform some legal act.
Contract.
It is a contract. 7 is A. A violation of a contract.
Breach.
They are in breach. Correct. 3 is B. The buyer's deposit with the purchase contract. What do we call that?
earnest money.
Earnest money.
9 is C. Earnest money. Mhm. A certain happening on which a contract depends.
Contingency.
It is a contingency. Correct. 6 is D. Contract not put into words but shown by actions.
Implied.
Implied.
An implied contract. 15 is E. A contract set down in so many words.
Express.
Express contract. 14 is F. A contract that has been fulfilled.
Executed.
Executed.
12 is G. Contract that has not yet been performed.
Just wait.
Executory.
Executory. 13 is H. A contract with a promise by each party.
Bilateral.
Bilateral.
2 is I, a bilateral contract. Interest acquired by buyer with a land contract.
Equitable.
Equitable title.
Equitable title. 10 is J. Offer returned to buyer with changes by seller.
Counter offer.
Counter offer.
8 is K, counter offer. Protection for seller when the buyer has another house to sell.
Escape
Escape
clause.
clause.
Escape clause. So 11 is L, and escape clause is also known as a kick out or knockout clause, right?
Yep.
Something of value given in exchange.
Consideration.
Oh, wait.
Consideration.
Consideration.
5 is M. 5 is M. Those legally qualified to enter into contracts.
Competent parties.
4 is N, competent parties. Transfer of so competent parties. That's 4 is N. Okay. Transfer of interest in a contract to a third party.
Assignment.
1 is O, assignment. An agreement under which the buyer pays installments and waits for the deed.
Land
16,
contract.
land contract.
16 is P, land contracts. All right, key terms to review. 2. A contract binding one party, the other party's free to act or not.
Option 4.
Describing an option. Seemingly valid contract, but neither party can sue to force performance.
11, unenforceable.
11 is B, it's an unenforceable contract. And what's an example of an unenforceable contract?
That would be a avoidable. Isn't that?
No, well, avoidable is something else. You got unenforceable, avoidable, void. What's an example of an unenforceable contract?
They were intoxicated?
Yeah, we're both parties. Neither party can sue. So they
Under
were
the
both drunk,
influence.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
A contract clause requiring punctual performance.
Time is of the essence.
Time is of the essence. It's very important. 10 is C. A return to the status quo. That means returning to the way you started.
Rescission.
Decision.
6D, rescission. A contract that does not meet all the legal requirements.
Void contract.
Not a
14.
contract at all to begin with. It's void.
14.
14 is E. A contract that's binding, but one party can disaffirm it.
Voidable.
It's valid, isn't it?
No, one party can disaffirm it though.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, if one party could disaffirm it, it's voidable. It's voidable
thought
by the
about that,
one
but-
party that could
Yeah.
disaffirm it. And what's an
Well-
example of a voidable contract?
A minor.
Contract with a minor, correct.
Yeah.
So which letter was this? 15 is,
15.
okay, 15 is F. 15 is
Oh,
F.
oh Lord, I thought it was G. I'm thinking of G.
A contract that meets all the legal requirements.
That's the valid one.
valid.
13 is G. All right. A court action usually asking that the seller be forced to sell as agreed.
Specific performance.
7 is H.
That was my question before, yeah.
All right. Well, try to
As
do these from the
agreed.
top of your head, even if you got them already written down, you know? It's good review. Time within which one is allowed to assert their legal rights.
Statute of limitations.
9 is I. And what's the statute of limitations to recover real property in New Jersey?
To recover real property.
Cover real property?
Is it,
To
is it
recover.
three days?
5 days.
Is that the 3-day one?
No, we're talking years.
Oh,
What's the statute of limitations to sue somebody in New Jersey?
6.
Is it
6
is it-
years.
Yeah.
And what about for lawsuits to recover the real property?
3 years, 10.
10. 10 years. Okay.
Well, I forgot that one.
Need to know that for exam. All right. Statute of limitations. That was 9 was I. A law requiring certain contracts be in writing.
That statute of frauds.
Yes. 8 is J. One-sided promise valid only if the other party acts.
Unilateral.
12 is K, unilateral. Convention that a written contract overrides spoken promises.
Parole evidence rule.
Parole evidence rule, because you have evidence, right?
Mhm.
5, so
It's written
5 is L.
as opposed to verbal.
Substitution of a new contract or substituting an old contract with a new one.
Novation too.
Novation, 2 is M. They write it really weird here.
Yep.
Substitution of a new contract for an existing one.
Yep. Yeah.
That's so backwards the way that they write this stuff. A sum agreed on to serve as damages in case of future default.
Liquidated damages,
Liquidated
one.
One is N, liquidated damages, and a meeting of the minds.
Offer and acceptance.
3 is O. You know what? I want to tell them to start writing this stuff the right way. Substitution
but-
of a new contract.
That's confusing.
2 is M. They write it backwards, don't they?
Yes, they
Yeah, some
do.
of them they do.
192.
Specific.
It's like they're intentionally trying to be confusing.
Exactly.
I know. Yeah.
Right, Tracy? I'm telling you.
See, there's that Pacific Performance, Victor. That's what I was talking about earlier.
What's that?
The court action asking the seller that the seller would be forced to sell as agreed. Isn't that a breach of contract?
Well, we were talking about the money. So specific performance is the lawsuit where you force someone to do something to that the contract required them to do. We were talking about at the time we were talking about the money.
Oh, okay.
Where we're
The
talking
earnest
about
money?
the escrow money, the where
earnest-
the seller can make a claim against the buyer's money.
Yeah.
And that wasn't even talking about liquidated damages either. Liquidated
Okay.
damages would be an agreement in advance. But if there was no liquidated damage agreement in the contract, a seller can still make a claim against the buyer's money if they were saying that they breached it or they were not operating in good faith.
Right.
Sometimes they'll do this just to try to keep the money because they'll be like, well, you know what, you're going to have an attorney try to get that money back. It's going to cost you and you still may not get it. So how about you give some of it up? You know, sometimes people are idiots like this. They play these games. All right. Chapter 14.
14.
Chapter 12. My bad.
Okay.
You know, I went to Linden High, 11, 14, All right, chapter 12. On the very first page, I want you to highlight something. We're going to change the page and then I'm going to start going through these slides. On the very first page, I want you to highlight on page 195, the last sentence in the first paragraph, a transfer of property by lease is known as demise. Highlight it and turn the page, and then we're going to go look at the slideshow here.
Okay.
So at the end of this chapter, you're going to be able to explain characteristics of the 4 leasehold estates, describe the standard provisions of the lease, talk about evictions, truth in lending and truth in renting, effects of truth in lending, and the American with Disabilities Act. It's actually truth in renting, not truth in lending in this chapter. So truth in renting. Discuss differences with the various types of leases and identify the functions of a property manager. Who works as a property manager? What kind of agent?
That's a special agent.
General.
The general agent.
General agent can do more. They can legally bind their clients to a contract. All right, so first we're going to start. What is a lease? A lease is an intangible asset. It's considered personal property. The owner is the lessor, because they're the one that gives the lease, who intentionally transfers most of their rights, like the right of possession, to the tenant, who is the lessee, for a limited time as specified in the lease, specified or defined in the lease. Now, every lease has a demising clause in it that says that the landlord is to let and the tenant is to take possession of the premises. And the lease is both a contract and a conveyance at the same time. They're conveying their property, and it's also the contract where they're saying that we're only giving it for a limited period, and you got to give it back, and it spells out all those terms, right? So on the top of page 196 in the second paragraph, we're going to highlight The New Jersey Statute of Frauds requires that leases for a period of more than 3 years be in writing, and it may be recorded if it's 2 or more years. Like I have written on here. Okay. This isn't the first time we heard this. We've seen this before in a different chapter. I had the same exact slide. Okay, so it's extremely risky to rely on verbal agreements, oral agreements for leases. So they should always be in writing, but it's not required if the lease is less than 3 years. Real estate licensees also follow real estate laws and the statutes 4515 and the rec rules, the administrative code 11.5, that state that we must always have contracts for sale or lease in writing, and we must never have verbal contracts. So when we talked about the estates and land, an estate and land, what is that? You should have it on your definition list. It describes the amount and kind of interest that someone has in real property, and there's 2 categories of estates and land. We have freehold estates, which describe the category of ownership. There's 3 types: the fee simple, fee determinable, and a life estate. And then we have 4 types of leasehold estates, which we're going to go over right now. They're less than freehold. You're not allowed to hold them forever or a lifetime. So it's not ownership. A lease is not ownership of real estate. It's just an owner intentionally conveying some of their rights to a tenant for a limited period of time as defined in a lease. So a lease is considered personal property, and it's an intangible or incorporeal assets, right? Something you cannot touch. It symbolizes your rights. Okay. So the 4 types of leasehold estates are as follows. So let's highlight the title, leasehold estates, and then the 4 types of leasehold estates. Estate for years, periodic estate, which is also known as period to period, estate at will, estate or tenancy at will, and estate or tenancy at sufferance. And then in the book, next to the leasehold estates, it says the types of lease and their distinguishing characteristics. Next to where it says estate for years, it says for a definite period of time. I want you to write for a fixed period with an end date. Fixed period with an end date. Because it says for a definite period of time, you're going to write fixed period with an end date. You know when the lease term ends because it's written in the lease. The end date is, right?
Period.
Fixed period with an end date. Let me know when you're done writing that.
Done.
Okay.
Now, estate from period to period, its distinguishing characteristic is that this lease automatically renews at the end of the term. So I want you to write, it still has a date in it, but it's a renewal date. So I want you to write next to that, has a renewal date. Has a renewal date. The tenant doesn't have to sign a new lease. It'll automatically renew for the same amount of time the original lease was written for. So if it was a 1-year lease, it'll automatically renew for a year. If it was a 3-month lease, it automatically renews for 3 months, so on and so forth, right?
So is that like an implied?
No, it's written.
Okay.
The estate at will, I want you to highlight for an indefinite period of time. Indefinite period of time. It's not defined. In an estate at will, you could stay there at the landlord's will as long as they will it and you wish to stay. Okay. Either party has to give 3 months written notice to terminate this, but it's for an indefinite period of time. And then we have an estate at sufferance, that's without the landlord's consent. All right, so let's go over a few things on this slide first before we move any further. With all these types of leases, rent is due at specific intervals as written in a lease. Anyone who terminates a lease early is in breach of contract, right?
Yes.
Yes.
A holdover tenant is a term to know. It's when a tenant does not vacate the premises after their lease rights have expired. So after the end of their lease term, they didn't get out. Not necessarily a negative thing, as long as they're still paying rent, right? Because your lease can expire, you just didn't sign a new one. Can you continue paying the landlord rent? Yeah, if the landlord accepts it, right? So the landlord can accept the holdover tenancy, or they could evict a holdover tenant. What is eviction? I just used the word eviction. So what is the word eviction? What does that mean? Eviction is the legal process of removing a tenant through the court system. A landlord cannot lock out a tenant or turn off their services or physically remove a tenant because that tenant still has rights, even if they're not paying rent. The landlord can't shut off their heat if the heat's included in the rent.
Or water.
Landlord can't shut off the water if it's included in their rent. Landlord can't change the locks if they're not paying the rent and throw their stuff out on the street. They have to be legally ejected, and that has to be done by the court. So let's go over each one of these. An estate for years. We're going to highlight the title, and we're going to highlight a leasehold estate, then go towards the end of the line with a specific termination date is an estate for years. Now you can highlight the whole thing. And a leasehold estate that continues for a definite period of time with a specific termination date is an estate for years. Next line, at the end of the line, we're going to highlight no notice is required to terminate such a lease at the end of the term. Next paragraph, we're going to highlight an estate for years need not necessarily last for years or even for 1 year. Go to the line directly below it and highlight its distinguishing characteristic is that it begins and ends at a specific time. So that's your typical lease, right? Your typical lease has a start date and an end date in it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So no notice is needed to terminate an estate for years. An estate for years can be 1 week, 1 month, a year, 2 years, but it doesn't have to be for a period of years. So don't let that name fool you because it says years in it. Doesn't mean that it's for years necessarily. The key characteristic for an estate for years is that it has an end date. It's for a fixed period of time. If I say you got a 2-year lease, what kind of lease is it? Estate for years.
Yes.
You know it ends in 2 years. Right? So no notice to quit is required at the end of the lease term. You know when you got to get out because it's in the lease. Well, if you did not renew the lease, you got to get out when it expires. This is why no further notice is needed to be given. And you can't terminate early because if you do, that's breach of contract. Right? Right, Vic? Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Next. A leasehold estate is a periodic estate. A periodic estate is a lease for also known from period to period, like month to month. All right, week to week, year to year. It's a lease with a date in it, but that date is a renewal date. So if the tenant does not give their notice to quit, that they're not going to renew the lease, it's automatically going to renew. Isn't that kind of the opposite of an estate for years? And in a estate for years, the tenant has to sign a new lease. Otherwise, they got to get out. In a periodic lease, the tenant has to give their notice to quit. Otherwise, it's automatically going to renew. Right?
Mhm.
All right. Now, either party can give notice to quit or terminate at the before the end of that or before the renewal date. How much notice is needed? Well, if it's a week-to-week lease, 1 week's notice, month to month, 1 month's notice. If it's for a period of years, 3 months notice is required.
And that will be for both parts?
Yeah, either party at the end of that lease term. Yep.
Okay.
Now, the landlord needs to have a good reason not to renew your lease, though. So on the periodic estate, each party must give notice to quit, to terminate. How much notice to terminate depends on the term of the lease, okay? Notice is required to terminate a periodic estate before it renews. Week to week, 1 week's notice required, so on and so forth. All right. When a tenant gives their notice to quit in a periodic estate, if they give their notice to quit and then they don't vacate, if the landlord doesn't continue accepting rent from them, they say, no, if you don't, you gave your notice to quit, you got to get out. The landlord can take the tenant to court and that tenant will be liable for double the rent for every month they remain that they've held over,
Oh.
if they don't accept the holdover tenancy.
Hmm.
And why would a landlord do that? Well, maybe they had another tenant lined up to move in
Right.
and they're in breach of contract with that tenant now
Hmm.
because the place isn't available for them.
Right.
All right, we're gonna go over these really quick. I want to go over these really quick before before we bail out for lunch, okay? So an estate or tenancy at will is for an indefinite period. There's no length of time specified in the lease for the term. Either party has to give 3 months notice to terminate. If either party dies, well, that lease term is done. Both parties have to agree to it. And so when would this be used? Well, often it's used by a landlord who's been notified by the state that the property is going to get taken away by eminent domain, but they don't know when that's going to happen. So when the state notifies them, okay, we're now taking it, well, they're going to get at least a 3 months notice. And the owner of the property has to deliver the property vacant to the state. So they'll give that tenant 3 months notice and the tenant's got to go. Okay. Now, even with a tenancy at will, you could stay there at the landlord's will, but you still have a lease. Rent is still due at specific intervals. It's just that we didn't put an end date in the lease term. That's what they mean by indefinite. It's not defined. Got it?
Yes.
Yes.
So you guys need to know about these types of leasehold estates, how they renew, when they end, how much notice is needed to terminate. You'll get questions on these things on exam.
Yep.
Now, an estate or tenancy at sufferance. Ooh, suffers. Who's suffering here? So a tenant who once had a valid lease. We're not talking about squatters' rights here. That would be an easement by prescription. A tenant who once had a valid lease. The lease had expired and it was not renewed. The tenant did not move out and holds possession without the consent of the landlord, they're now a holdover tenant. They could be evicted at any time for non-payment of the rent. All right, so a tenancy at sufferance is a tenant here. You know what? This is, I got it in bullet points here. Really shouldn't have that all in bullet points. Let me make this a little simpler. So an estate at or tenancy at sufferance is a tenant who had a valid lease. The lease expired, and the tenant did not move out.
Wow.
Okay, they're a holdover, right? Okay. The lease expired, and the tenant did not renew the lease, and did not move out. They're now a holdover tenant, right?
Yes.
So they're now a holdover tenant. A holdover tenant can be evicted at any time, right? Well, holdover tenant who's not paying the rent anyway. So a holdover tenant not paying rent can be evicted at any time for non-payment of the rents. No notice is needed to start eviction. All right, do not renew. Not squatter's rights, which is an easement by prescription. This tenant was once a lawful tenant with a lease. Okay, remember, you cannot get an easement by prescription against somebody when you had permission to be there, right? So just as fee simple absolute is the highest estate in land, tenancy at sufferance is the lowest. You're a tenant who doesn't even have a valid lease there. Your lease expired. You didn't move out, and you're not paying rent. Every day you remain there, you cause the landlord to suffer. Thus, you are a tenant at sufferance. So just as fee simple absolute's the highest estate in land, tenancy at sufferance is the lowest. The tenant's rights have expired, isn't paying rent. They, however, must be evicted through the court system because those tenants still have rights, even though they don't have a valid lease there anymore and they're not paying rent. They still have rights, and the landlord can't just change the locks and throw their crap out on the street. They need to evict them. They need to go through the eviction process. So let's highlight this stuff, and then we'll leave off here, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight, we already did estate for years. We need to go to periodic estate on page 196. Right, page 196, we're going to highlight a periodic estate, sometimes called estate from period to period, is created when a landlord and tenant enter into an agreement that continues for an, cross out the word indefinite there. Cross out the word indefinite. And then continue highlighting when it continues for a length of time without a specific expiration date. Then go down to the last sentence and highlight, the agreement is automatically renewed for similar succeeding periods until one of the parties gives notice to terminate. The next paragraph, just put an asterisk next to it. It just describes, how the different, the termination periods and stuff, there's nothing to highlight really. The following paragraph on page 197, we're going to highlight a New Jersey tenant who remains in possession of a leased premises after giving notice to quit the premises may be held liable for double the rent. Then highlight the first sentence under tenancy at will. And in the next paragraph, we're going to highlight the next to last sentence in that paragraph that says the term of an estate at will is indefinite, but the estate may be terminated by giving 3 months notice. And then also underline the word indefinite. Because you're going to get some kind of question on exam that'll give you the 4 types of leasehold estates, and it'll say which one of these is for an indefinite period of time. You need to be able to identify that. That's why I'm having you cross out the word for that definition under periodic estate, because I don't want you getting confused with it. And then under tenancy at sufferance, we're going to highlight the first sentence, which is the first almost 3 lines. And in that third line, we're going to highlight the second sentence as well, all the way up to the point that says a tenant at sufferance can be evicted at any time. So we're just about highlighting the first 3 lines under tenancy at sufferance. And then above that, you're going to write where it says a tenancy arises when a tenant who lawfully came into possession of real property continues after a leasehold. After above that, where you highlighted that, you're going to write.
I'm sorry, where did you see that one? The one you just read, something about a leasehold? Because
Tenancy at sufferance. Tenancy at sufferance on page 197.
Yeah, but I don't see the sentence you're saying.
Well, you're highlighting the first 3 lines.
I did that.
All right. Well, that's what I was reading.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So a tenant at sufferance arises when a tenant who lawfully came into possession of real property continues after their lease rights have expired to hold possession of the premises without the consent of the landlord. A tenant at sufferance can be evicted at any time. You're going to write above that, they're also not paying rent. That's important. Because if they're paying rent, the landlord's not suffering, are they? They accepted the holdover tenancy. So it's very important little detail that they left out of that description there on page 197.
Was the most important part of it anyway.
Yep, a very important missing detail, which I'm writing in my notes to submit to the book manufacturer.
Not paying rent.
And so you guys are going to continue at provisions for lease after lunch. You guys are going to take lunch now. It's 12:12. Look at that, double hour. I'm going to give you the morning poll. Launch that right now. And I'm going to put there in the chat message, lunch, be back at 1:12, 1:15-ish, whatever. And I will notify the instructor.
All right, Victor.
All right, guys, have a good day.
Day.
All right. Bye. Everybody answer the poll?
Victor,
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
sorry, I have to leave early to go to work. So Can I make up the hours another day or
Sure. Yeah, you could sit in any classes, make up hours and stuff.
recording?
But I mean, how much did you miss?
Probably just the second half of the day.
No, I mean, overall.
Not that, maybe about an hour or two the most.
Oh, no, then you don't need to make it up. If you've only missed an hour or two out of the whole class, you don't got to worry about it. You're
All right,
allowed
and
to miss up to
tomorrow
2 days without.
regarding the exam, I may have to, do you know what time is the exam? Because I have to leave early for
No,
work.
hold on. There is no time for the exam. Look, we're behind here. We're not going to finish this book by tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. We're
All
going
right.
to finish as far as we can tomorrow. And then you guys are going to finish it off on your own by watching the recordings of the class and following in the book.
All
'Cause
right.
you have me recorded teaching you.
Yep.
So you got the recordings there for that.
Yep.
And then when you guys are done, because you'll already have your hours in, technically you could take the exam already.
All right.
But you need the content. So you're going to finish off by watching it that way and following on your own pace. Okay. And when you feel like you're ready to take the exam, you're going to go onto the calendar page of the website and register to take it. And then
Okay.
I'm going to send you an email that's with instructions that you can take it now.
All
I
right.
have to first check your hours and certify that, and then I'll send you the link to take the exam, and then you can take it anytime you want, day or night.
Okay, sounds good.
You don't need to schedule it. Okay,
All right, thank you.
you're welcome.
Victor.
Yep.
Where is your broker's office at? Where are you located?
I'm registered where the school is.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking for a new location. I'm looking for a new location because that's not a proper location for the brokerage. I actually shut down where I used to be. I used to be in Edison.
Mhm.
So I just registered it over where the school is until I find another location.
Oh, okay.
So hopefully I'll be buying a building. I'm trying to find something that'll be good for both the school and the brokerage.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So what location you looking probably? Where will you?
I'm looking for a good location for a building at a right price that has the parking. I got to
Right.
worry about the city zoning because some cities are a pain in the ass with parking when you say that you got a school.
Right.
So I'm looking. The search is going.
Mhm.
Update the slideshow.
Okay, well, see you tomorrow then.
Yep, I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Have a good day.
You too.
Do 12 updates. All right, updated. Hello, Victor speaking. How can I help you?